Hi, welcome to another reaction video. I'm Kylie. About 2 months ago, I reacted to a BeerBiceps podcast of the Ranveer show, where he interviewed Abhijit Chavda about the Russia and Ukraine conflict. I'll link that video in the description box below. So after hearing that Ranveer gave me a shout out on his follow-up podcast, it's called The World is Effed, Geopolitics Update. I felt like I should react to that one as well. Let's get to it.
The fact that most modern day news media is biased, is possibly bought out, is possibly not pure, which is why today's podcast should reach international audiences. Abhijit Chavda is on the show again. He's a scientist, he's a historian. But for me, my favorite version of him is when he becomes a geopolitics expert. Of course, he's given us updates about the Russia-Ukraine situation, but we spoke about everything from the India perspective to the France perspective to the China perspective to the America perspective. I don't think we've ever created such an important geopolitics themed episode. So please watch it till the end. Some of it is heavy, some of it is controversial. We've even mentioned everyone's favorite internet topic, the Illuminati. Lots of intense opinions coming your way, courtesy Abhijit Chavda on the Ranveer show. It's not a Bollywood star today. You guys got what y'all wanted. We got Abhijit Chavda in the house. How are you, sir?
I am great. It's great to be back on TRS. Always got to talk to you.
It's great hosting you in the new space. The thing you should know is that our old space was sustained because of your podcast.
Thank you.
And everything you did for the show. When we couldn't get on the celebrities and all that, we got on folks like yourself and kind of turned this podcast into a knowledge podcast. Speaking about knowledge, sir, this is a geopolitics special.
Yes.
I learn almost all my geopolitics from you through these podcasts, through your YouTube channel. I love everything that you're doing, sir.
Thank you so much.
Going to link it down below, guys. Please go check it out. But first, we got to talk about the Russia-Ukraine situation, the Russia-Ukraine updates, and moreover, the world updates, what it means for India now, going forward. The joy of geopolitics is if you study it enough, you can start predicting the future a bit.
A bit.
So let's touch upon those topics as well. I don't even know where to begin this particular podcast, sir. So maybe let's just do a very quick kind of storytelling recap of what happened in the Russia-Ukraine war since our last podcast, which we did at the start of the conflict. So what's happened? What do you think Putin's state of mind is now? What do you think is the future of that situation?
Right. So we had the last discussion just before the war happened. And on February 24, Russia invaded Ukraine. And everybody expected that they would steamroll Ukraine, wipe it out, flatten it. But nothing of the sort happened. They went in very systematically, very deliberately. Their vehicles were even obeying the traffic signals and all. So they were doing it in a very systematic way. They did not destroy any communication lines, any power lines, nothing like that. And they have been, it looks like they had a very clear plan of exactly what they wanted and what they did not want. So they had marched all the way up to the capital city, Kiev, and actually encircled it. And eventually they retreated from there. So it looks like it was a chess move meant to deceive the opponent as to what the real intentions are. So as of today, it's been, today is the end of May, more or less. What's happened, what the situation on the ground right now is such that they have captured at least 1/4 of Ukraine. It is now under Russian control. It is an area of land larger than Bangladesh, larger than Nepal. Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe, and 1/4 of that has been taken over by Russia. The eastern part of Ukraine and the southern part of Ukraine, more or less the coastal regions. So it looks like now that they pause to cut off the entire coast of Ukraine, the Black Sea coast, and the eastern part, which is the Donbas region. Donbas. That seems to have been the objective of the Russian advance. Now, what is Mr. Putin thinking? What is Mr. Zelenskyy thinking? Zelenskyy is essentially nothing but a puppet. He is a puppet of NATO of the West. NATO wanted to expand into Ukraine, and it looks like they were trying to provoke some kind of reaction from Russia, which would enable them to impose sanction and essentially try to cripple the Russian economy, which is not kind of worked. Because if you see the strength of the Russian ruble, on February 23, one day before the war. And if you see it today the Russian ruble is stronger. It is at a better position. So the Russians have been able to not only stop the bleeding, but reverse it and make their currency stronger because they have the trump card, they have the aces.
So are all these sanctions that the U.S. and the West really hurting Russia? It doesn't sound like it.
Oil and gas supplies to Europe. The whole of Europe is essentially dependent on Russian gas. And the Russians have said, you want to buy our gas, you have to pay in rubles, which means there's a demand for the currency, which means its price goes up.
Wow.
So that's what they've done. So that
was definitely an angle for even starting the conflict in the first place. One of the angles?
I think it is something they had foreseen.
Okay.
I think this war, this invasion has been in the planning for at least 5 to 10 years. Because we know what happened in 2014 when the Russians annexed the Crimean Peninsula. So all of that, I think, was a long-term game plan. It is territory that was traditionally Russian territory. If you see the history, it's always been that way. And because of the circumstances that led to the disintegration of the USSR, all of these territories were taken away from Russia. So now they are taking it back. So it looks like they want to take out 1/4 of Ukraine, eastern region, and the entire coastal region up to Odessa in slightly towards the west. So that seems to be the game plan. They are also coordinating with China because China and the US have this big friction. So the Chinese and the Russians are coordinating. I would not call it a long-term alliance. It's an alliance of convenience because Russia and China are also actually adversaries. If you look at the geography, it is inevitable that there will be adversaries. As China rises, Russia will feel threatened. And as of today, there are Russian ballistic missiles aimed at China. Yeah, so it's there and vice versa. So that's how it goes. In geopolitics, there are no real adversaries or allies. It's like dance partners. When you dance with a person, the way you dance is going to be, it will depend on your physical characteristics and your partner's physical characteristics. If you do the tango, the foxtrot, or the salsa, or whatever, if you're large, your partner is small, you're going to dance in a certain way. If your partner is larger than you and you're smaller or weaker, you're going to dance in a different way. So it's all about the dance. It's not about enmity or alliance, it's about the dance. So right now we are witnessing a certain kind of dance between Russia, China, and NATO. NATO is a stand-in for the US. One thing people don't realize is that the largest power in Europe, apart from Russia, is the US. It's not Germany, it's not France. These are all subsidiary states of the US. The US is what drives NATO and the EU. So none of the countries in Western Europe has an independent foreign policy except for France. And there's a lot of friction between France and the US.
Okay.
So there's all of this dynamics at play right now. And so that's where we are vis-a-vis the Ukraine situation.
What is the friction between France and the US?
Well, the US, see, it's like this. At the end of World War II, the US and the USSR were the victorious powers in Europe. Most of the fighting was done by the USSR and most of the bleeding was done by the USSR. But the Americans, and as soon as the World War II got over, there was this Cold War that came into place because the US realized that Russia is very powerful and they wanted to dominate Europe. So then that's where the Iron Curtain came into place and Europe was split into two branches. One was the Eastern Bloc, which is the USSR bloc, and the rest was the American bloc. Now, the Americans have a permanent military presence in several European countries. Germany has been under permanent US occupation since 1945. People don't realize it. So Germany is not truly a free country. It's a country under foreign occupation.
I was actually stationed in Germany for about 6 years. But yes, the US military has maybe hundreds of posts in foreign countries in Europe. I think they have some in Belgium, Italy, Spain, Germany. I mean, they are all over the place.
And the UK also is a US vassal state, more or less. It's only France that has maintained some kind of strategic autonomy over the years because of the policies they pursued.
Okay, a little hard-hitting question.
Yeah.
Is this economic imperialism?
It is geopolitical, geoeconomic, geostrategic imperialism.
Okay.
The US, we consider it to be a superpower. That's the nice term to use. It's actually an empire.
Yeah.
Superpower is a euphemism for empire. Let's understand what really happened. In the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, the UK was the British Empire, which encompassed much of the globe. Now, in the 1920s, 30s, etc., the UK was waning. The British Empire was declining. It was in gradual decline. And after World War II, what happened is that the empire continued, but the headquarters moved westwards from London, UK to Washington, DC. It's the Anglo-Saxon Empire. It's the same entity. All of the structures are still in place, but now it's dominated from Washington, DC.
And the Illuminati.
Maybe.
That's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole different thing, yeah.
Are you familiar with the Freemasons thing?
Yes, of course.
Would you like to enlighten the listeners who are just curious about this whole Illuminati angle and Freemasons?
Right. So the Freemasons are supposed to be, they are known to be a secret society of sorts.
Yeah.
They're not very secret nowadays, but there is some aspect of the Freemasons that is like open to all. Like there are these Freemason lodges or chapters in various countries in the world, including in India.
Okay.
And so the Freemasons started off as maybe a Jewish cult, not a cult, but a society of some kind. It was a very secret society, and it was persecuted in Europe during the Middle Ages, etc. That's why they became very secretive. And it is alleged that they hold the reins of power in Europe and across the world. And they have chapters across the world, including in India. Many prominent Indians were Freemasons. They were members of the Freemason society.
Supposedly like?
Rudyard Kipling was one. He was obviously British born, but British. Swami Vivekananda.
The Jungle Book.
You look at the website of the Freemasons, the Indian chapter, and you will see the pictures of all the prominent Indian Freemasons. One was Swami Vivekananda, one was Motilal Nehru, and J.R.D. Tata most likely.
Right.
Tata.
Indians of the past have been members of the Freemason Society.
Maybe the long...
Same with the US. Some of the most powerful Americans to ever live are and have been Freemasons. Supposedly.
objective is just to survive and continuously hoard power.
Perhaps to survive, perhaps to rule the world, perhaps to rule the world from behind the scenes without drawing attention to where the real power lies. Perhaps to distract the world into believing the power lies in X place, but it actually lies in Y place. These are conspiracy theories, but it's possible. It's theoretically possible.
No, I believe there was a rival society called the Moors, if I'm not mistaken.
The Moors?
Yeah, it was a whole Masons versus Moors thing.
I see.
And one of the narratives I've read is that it was primarily white people versus primarily black people.
The Moors are supposed to be the African origin invaders of Europe, the Islamic invaders of Europe. Yeah, so they were obviously African people.
Yeah, and what I read is that Africa from ancient times was actually a very rich continent.
Yes.
Governed by Moors. And if you actually speak to Nigerian, Ghanaian people today, they talk about their own history in a very prolific manner. They say that, no, listen, we were a very rich part of Africa. And the same with Ethiopia, etc. Which is at the other far end of Africa. History is written by the winners of war. What is said is that there could have possibly been a massive war between the Masons and the Moors, and all this is just speculation. But this is what I've read. There could have been a massive war between the Masons and Moors. The Masons came out on top. It wasn't white versus black. It was Masons and Moors, where there were white and black on both sides. But the Masons came out on top, and they rewrote African history in a very negative, broken manner. So the same narratives that we have in Indian culture, where we blame the British for spoiling our education system, spoiling our mindset, giving us that victim mentality, not opening up the economy till 1990. Similar narratives exist in Africa today as well, where a lot of Africans have a very low sense of self-esteem. And I know this because of a lot of African YouTubers I met. I met someone called Wode Maya. He's a Ghanaian YouTuber whose main purpose right now as a YouTuber is to kind of help the narrative of Africa all over the world.
I see.
So this bad narrative of Africa has also led to increasing worldwide racism against black people in general. But anyway, that's what so-called powerful societies like the Freemasons can do over 100 or 200-year time period.
Quite possible. They can if you have a secret society that is very powerful, you can orchestrate world events from behind the scenes and then blame somebody else for it. It's quite possible.
And psychologically affect an entire generation.
Yes, it can destroy entire societies and deracinate them, brainwash them, make them see themselves as very inferior. That sort of thing has been seen over and over again.
Yeah. I also feel power is strongly dictated by where the money is at. So I am sure that if you just scan big money shifts over the last 200 years, you'll be able to kind of spot where the Freemasons were at. Like how the Kohinoor diamond landed up in the UK, or all of India's ancient wealth landed up in the UK. Bharat was split up into 4 countries, etc., etc. So what you're saying about the modern day Freemasons definitely could be in Europe, could be in America. But if you had to guess where and who the modern day Freemasons are, what would be your guess?
I would imagine it could be possibly somewhere in Europe or America, maybe split across both the continents. It's actually just one entity. And if you're really rich and really powerful, borders don't mean anything. You can go and reside anywhere in the world. So if the Freemasons do exist, they will be residing in open sight, but they will not draw attention to themselves. And they'll be so rich that nothing matters. And they will try and pretend like they are powerless or whatever. I mean, if you are that rich, you want to hide in plain sight and not display any outward signs of wealth or power. So it could be in continental Europe, Western Europe, or in the US, North America, most probably.
I'd actually love the listeners of this podcast at this point to drop your comments in terms of everything you have read about the Illuminati, Freemasons, so that we can take this part of the discussion further the next time. But right now, let's get back to the war situation and the current geopolitical scenario. Actually, no, let's go back to Freemasons. Do you think NATO is also aligned with the Freemasons? I would actually reframe that question as, at the forefront, everyone knows what the purpose of NATO is, to sort of help maintain world peace and whatever the narratives are online. My question to you, sir, behind the scenes, what do you think the objectives of NATO are?
The objective of NATO is very simple: to maintain and prolong American hegemony in Western Europe and hopefully all across the world.
What is the meaning of hegemony?
Hegemony means overwhelming superiority of all kinds, economic, military, etc. Power. So that's what it is. That's why we call the US a superpower, because essentially it has the ability to intervene anywhere in the world at 30 minutes notice, either militarily or economically. Its currency is the global reserve currency, the US dollar, which means it can cut any country off at a moment's notice from the global financial system, and so on. So it has overwhelming economic power and overwhelming military power. It has 10 aircraft carriers, it has a fleet of nuclear submarines, it has ballistic missiles, it has an array of spy satellites, military satellites. It can intervene anywhere it wants within 30 to 60 minutes on demand. So that's what it is, and that's one of the components is NATO in Europe.
Like how they say wars are primarily won because of logistics. So NATO has basically set up an intense logistics system for America all over the world, so that they can intervene in any war.
So NATO is all about Europe.
Okay.
The original purpose of NATO was to counterbalance and USSR. It was essentially an anti-USSR alliance. But after the USSR broke up, NATO continued expanding eastwards. And they had given a guarantee to Russia that they would not expand an inch eastwards. And the moment the USSR broke up, they started expanding eastwards.
And that's what the question is. If the USSR is disbanded, why does NATO still exist?
Essentially is what led eventually to the Ukraine conflict that we are witnessing right now. So NATO's original purpose was to counterbalance the USSR. Now it is, well, whether you like it or not, it's an anti-Russia alliance.
I mean, for the time being.
For the time being.
Because that's what's required right now.
Yes. They would like to destroy Russia if possible.
This is why it's so important for people to stop watching traditional news media. Because it can be controlled by powers larger than yourself. And if you want your news, get it from 3-4 different angles in terms of watch right-wing news, watch left-wing news, watch centrist news, listen to podcasts, hear perspectives of YouTubers, and then form your own opinion at the end of the day.
Yes.
For example, we were talking about Succession outside. And even in Succession, I think in season 2, there is a dialogue where someone says that, no, I get my news from a comedian's podcast. And they were hinting at Joe Rogan.
Okay.
Very obviously. He's the only comedian with a mainstream podcast. And the other character reacts like, in a bad way that, oh, okay, then I don't take you seriously. So maybe the Freemasons are working through mainstream media and fictional shows like Succession to drive the narrative against the people who are speaking the truth.
It is possible. Media is extraordinarily powerful. It is what helps whoever is in power control the thoughts, feelings, and ideas and emotions of people, and the perceptions and the worldview of people. So if you control the media, you can make people believe whatever you want them to believe.
Which is why Zelensky's image was whitewashed this much, according to you?
Well, Zelenskyy is an interesting individual. He is of Jewish origin. He is the president of a country where Nazis have free run, neo-Nazis. I mean, the Ukraine has a Nazi history.
Give some backstory also.
Well, if you look at the various atrocities that took place against Jews in that part of the world during World War II, there was a lot of it coming from the grassroots in Ukraine. The people and the political leaders. There was this guy called Stefan Bandera, who was a very virulent Nazi. Today, he's one of the national heroes in Ukraine. And even today, you have this Azov regiment, the Azov regiment, which is essentially a neo-Nazi regiment. They have these Nazi tattoos and all that. And they are fighting, they are involved in the conflict. The Russians want to destroy them.
Is that regiment an actual part of the Ukrainian army? That's what I want to know. So I disagree with the conflict going on right now, but if the Russians wanted to take out that Nazi regiment, then I would not stand in the way.
And this guy Zelenskyy, he's a Jew and he's supporting Nazis who massacred his own people. In his address to the Greek parliament, Zelenskyy brought with him a new Nazi, a member of the Azov brigade, I believe. So that's the situation there in Ukraine. It's so strange that
That's weird.
would actually promote Nazi people, but that's how it is.
Yeah, you know what I found strange about this whole Zelenskyy narrative online is that it was too whitewashed. Like that they were just talking about the good shit about him, and every leader, including Barack Obama, including like the most iconic leaders in history, have a dark side. It is the nature of leadership. It is the nature of politics.
Very true.
It can be completely whitewashed. And you are seeing YouTube videos, Instagram memes, Reddit articles about how awesome Zelenskyy is, but there has to be some sort of a dark side, at least a bit, at least something wrong that he's done. He can't be a perfect leader, which got me thinking that, okay, you know, let's question the situation. And in no way is me defending Putin. Like, everyone knows Putin's dark sides very openly. I've met Russian people, spoken to them. Even they have like grey opinions about him. But at least it's more real than whitewashing someone entirely.
Putin is real. We know his dark side. We know he's a dictator. We know he's authoritarian. We know everything about him. It's been discussed ad nauseum in the media. Zelenskyy, they have created this brand. There's this brand building exercise going on right now.
Right.
Zelenskyy.
That he stood in the middle of Kiev. He escaped Russian. There's so many stories.
Yes.
I like the story about the Russian fighter jet. You know, they call it Russian. The
ghost of
Ukrainian fighter jet.
Yeah. It turned out to be fake news.
That's what there's so much branding. There's so much storytelling happening from the Ukrainian side. What about the Russian side?
It's been blanked out. It's been blanked out totally.
Except in Russia, where it's whitewashed for them.
Well, they have to put something out, but what's happened is that on social media, which is all controlled in the US, all these Russian channels and Russian handles have been banned. So there's only one narrative being spread right now. So that's what we're watching. It's the disinformation or brand building in real time.
Can I give a deeper brand building angle here? Because I come from the world of brands, human beings, and I'm not talking about the so-called intellectual human beings or the upper classes, the general masses can never relate to concepts or non-living objects, but they can always relate to people. Zelenskyy is now synonymous with Ukraine. When you think of Zelenskyy, you'll think of Ukraine.
Yes.
If Zelenskyy is a hero as a brand, Ukraine becomes the hero brand and Russia becomes the obvious villain. The world can't understand grey, they can only understand villains and heroes.
Yes.
So you're painting Ukraine as a hero, an underdog hero, and the coach in the Ukraine corner is Big Daddy USA.
Yes.
So you're trying to project USA as the big protector, etc. That's the actual brand building that's going on here, in terms of maybe the actual war is obviously happening between USA and Russia, and everyone knows that. But it's this whole branding of Zelenskyy is happening from a perspective of, again, rebranding USA as the forefront of the world, because I think the whole Trump situation affected the branding of USA all over the world, amongst other things. In terms of there is this kind of worldwide sort of little bit of hate that's begun against USA for being overly material, for affecting the environment in the way it does. Could this be an angle?
Certainly. Right now, what we are witnessing is that the world is now beginning to see through all the lies and disinformation. The US has been orchestrating coups all across the world. All of that has come out in black and white now. The entire list is available on social media anytime you like, anytime you want to see. There is this conflict going on in Yemen. They are engineering and so much else going on.
Yemen?
They talk about a rules-based world order. They flout the rules anytime they feel like. So now people are beginning to see the hypocrisy and the lies. And what the Americans are trying to do is they are trying to position themselves as the good guys, as always, and the Russians are the bad guys. And Zelenskyy is this Che Guevara-like figure, right? They are trying to position him in that sort of manner. So that's what they're doing. And it's very easy to sway people's opinions. When you have an underdog who is under siege and who is standing bravely, people want to root for the underdog. It's always that way.
Psychological.
Yeah, psychologically.
David and Goliath.
That sort of thing, yes.
Wow. Little quick anecdote on Che Guevara.
So Che Guevara was this Marxist guerrilla.
Cuban.
Fought in Cuba, who fought in South America. He fought on the side of Fidel Castro, who became the authoritarian leader of Cuba, who ruled for many decades when Cuba was under US sanctions. It still is, actually. And we see him, the world sees him as a great rebel and a great freedom fighter, but he had a very dark side. He took part in massacres and summary executions of people and all that. He was a very cruel person. Eventually, he went down south to Latin America and he tried to foment other Marxist revolutions over there. Eventually, he was hunted down and executed by certain forces that were allied with the US. But we see him as the guy in the poster. The guy with the wild hair, the motorcycle diaries, and that very famous poster that we have everywhere of Che Guevara. It's on t-shirts, it's on walls everywhere. So people remember iconic images, and that's what they've created out of him. So that is a little bit about Che Guevara.
Illuminati, man. This is the Freemasons at work again. But coming back to the actual conflict, we were talking about America. I want to just give two disclaimers here. One, I honestly love that country for its ambition and the kind of morals that it stands for. I've learned a lot for my own professional life directly from the USA. Directly inspired from those entrepreneurs. Directly inspired from how that country runs. Directly inspired from how it's a country built by immigrants. There's too much to learn from that country, but no one's completely whitewashed. That's why we have to highlight some of the gray, some of the darker stuff. Which is why I have to ask you about the actual atrocities which are not reported by mainstream media, including Indian news channels. What is not reported about what America is doing all over the world? And I'll tell you why. India does not have a culture of free speech.
Yes, we don't.
That's true.
Yeah.
We're not.
India is a democracy, but you don't have free speech? Or is there no freedom of the press? Can someone clarify that, please?
To say
Certain things.
Yes.
Yes.
Therefore, that means in public forums, you can't really express yourself completely.
Yes.
Contrary to America, where there is a culture of expressing yourself.
There used to be one.
Oh, okay.
There used to be
I believe that the history they're taught in high schools is part history and part modern day civics, in terms of they teach them about what's happening with the political situation now. The good thing about USA is that from age 16, they're at least taught to think about current affairs, as far as I understand. Or maybe the morphed version of current affairs that their news serves them. But technically we're neutral, sir, because India is not on either side.
We're not.
And I know that Americans watch episodes with you. We've had, I think, American Marine, I believe she reviews our episode. You should check those out. Hi, if you're watching.
So I'm that Marine that he just referred to, only I'm actually an Army soldier, a veteran, but if he wants to call me a Marine, he can. I don't really care. I just felt honored to even be mentioned. So hello back.
What's the neutral perspective on what America is doing all over the world in terms of the geopolitics that you have learned? And I know that you don't even get your geopolitics from, say, a BBC,
No.
a CNN. You get it from like a wider perspective.
Yes.
So what's the neutral opinion on what America has been doing behind the scenes? In terms of, America is responsible for a lot of atrocities all over the world. Let's highlight that.
Well, if you want to talk about atrocities, we can think about Dresden in World War II.
If he's going to bring up Dresden when the U.S. military firebombed the city, then he's probably going to bring up the atomic bombs on Japan, and he might even bring up Agent Orange during Vietnam. The U.S. military, like any military in a wartime situation, will have some sort of atrocity going on and war crime. And it's something that's been going on for thousands of years, and it's going to keep on happening as long as there's armed conflicts. I'm sad to say.
There is this German city called Dresden. It was firebombed by the Americans. I don't know how many thousands of tons of bombs were dropped in one night. The entire city was burned down. Tens of thousands of people were burned alive. There was no need for that. They talk about not harming civilians. What about this? And when it comes to Japan, what was the need to drop 2 atomic bombs in a destroyed country? I think they were trying to test the effect of nuclear radiation and fallout on human beings. There was absolutely no need to do that. Then let's talk about Vietnam. The amount of mines they've dropped, the amount of bombs they dropped over there on Vietnam, the biological and chemical weapons they dropped there, Agent Orange to defoliate the forest. It causes birth defects even today in Vietnam. And the various massacres they carried out, My Lai massacre. I mean, they shot about 300-400 people to death in a village, unarmed men, women, children, that sort of thing. That is just the tip of the iceberg. So they have done all these things. The highway of death in Iraq, the Iraqi soldiers were retreating. They were not doing anything. They were not fighting, and they were all mowed down from the air. I mean, there is this whole list, this whole litany of atrocities they've done. But one could argue that they are simply trying to preserve their hegemony, their superpower status, their empire status, which is something every empire does. If you look at the Roman Empire, it was not bathed in milk. The history of the Roman Empire is full of these atrocities. Julius Caesar committed genocide in Europe, the Celtic people. Alexander was a brutal, cruel tyrant. I mean, look at the things he did. His own historians wrote about that. The number of people he crucified, the number of people he killed for no reason. In India, it is alleged, I mean, his own historians, the Greek historians, write that he did all sorts of atrocities. So the Americans are not the only empire that have done it. But yes, they have been doing this. They have been engineering coups. They don't really believe in democracy. They have been engineering undemocratic coups everywhere. And they occupy many countries even today. Japan, for instance, is under US military occupation since 1945. It's permanent military occupation. Japan is a country under foreign military occupation. It's not a democratic country. The Constitution of Japan was written by the Americans. It has not been amended once since 1945. The South Koreans, their country is under US occupation since the 1950s, permanent US occupation, dozens of US military bases over there. The logic, the rationale is that we are offering you protection against the evil North Koreans. And the rationale for Japan is that we are offering you protection against China. But there are dozens and dozens of US military bases, which I'm sure the Japanese don't want. They have been protesting against that in Okinawa and other places.
So he is right, especially with the rise of incidents involving U.S. service members and the Japanese and Okinawans. There's been some murders and other crimes. Even though the U.S. military does do some good for the Japanese economy, a lot of the Japanese and Okinawans just want the U.S. out.
Shinzo Abe, for instance, he was one Japanese prime minister who wanted an independent foreign policy. He was talking about revising the constitution. Suddenly he resigns. He says, my health is not good, and so on and so forth. So that's what they've been doing.
I also want to highlight one thing. This is where you actually get to know the power of America.
Yes.
It's a powerful entity,
yes.
USA. And wherever power resides, money gets attracted to those places. South Korea, extremely rich. Japan, extremely rich. Germany, extremely rich. I don't know if I'd say the same word, Italy. But at least these three grown so much economically. Could this be a reason?
Well, Japan is an interesting case. In the 1980s, Japan was one of the powerful economies. It was the number 2 economy in the world in the 1980s. It was projected to eventually surpass the United States. I mean, the Japanese business policies and models were copied and studied all across the world. They were a real business and economic superpower. They were a vibrant economy and a very confident nation.
It's a very interesting case, right? They combined samurai mentalities with business to make more efficient systems and to make teams work better. It's called, I think, Japanese economic boom. Post-World War Japanese economic boom. Very interesting case.
Very interesting. And then suddenly something happened. All of a sudden, it's like somebody switched off a faucet, a tap, and the economy went into a recession overnight, which it has still not recovered from. Today, Japan is a decaying country. It's a beautiful country with a beautiful culture, one of the most technologically advanced society in the world, and still very traditional. But it's an aging population. The fertility rate has dropped below replacement levels. There is this phenomenon of hikikimori or something it's called, where youngsters, they stay forever in their parents' basement. They don't go out. They don't interact with the world, and there's a lot of suicides over there. Elderly people dying alone. This society is crumbling and decaying. What happened overnight? They were surging ahead, and all of a sudden something went wrong. I wonder what went wrong. Something behind the scenes happened, and the whole economy was ruined. That's what happened. I mean, who's really running Japan? It's the US. It's the US that is really ruling Japan or running Japan. Recently, some Japanese politician actually said that, and then it was censored. That nothing happens in Japan without US approval. If any important policy decision is made, there are US generals who are sitting there overseeing that. And that's how it is. And similarly for South Korea. South Korea, again, it is a prosperous country, one of the highest GDP per capita numbers in the world. And you can see, though, that their society is being re-engineered. I have nothing against any specific religion, but you have a certain Western religion that is taking over the country. So there are a lot of people who are atheists and a lot of people who are increasingly becoming Christians. And that is something the Americans have been engineering since the 1950s. They sent, hundreds, maybe thousands of missionaries to South Korea. Similarly with Japan.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, you should know. I mean, that's the hidden reality of the world. If you look below the surface, you find all of this coming out.
What's happening in Saudi Arabia?
Saudi Arabia is peaceful. Okay, it's very well controlled, very rigidly controlled and all. Nowadays, there is liberalization happening because the Americans want that. So nowadays, women don't have to wear whatever they used to wear earlier. They can drive, they can leave their hair open and all. So there is some change happening in Saudi Arabia, most likely at the behest of the US. But Yemen has been disastrously plundered right now. It's being bombed every day. So there is this famine-like situation, starvation happening there. There are no supplies, no medicines, daily bombardment from Saudi Arabia. So that's what's happening. It's a humanitarian crisis, but nobody cares because nobody reports what's happening.
I'll pause the video here and we'll finish it in part 2, which should be posted either tomorrow or the next day. So far, this is a very informative video, and I'm agreeing with almost everything that he says. He brings up a lot of good points, such as NATO, and I think he is right in many respects. NATO has become an anti-Russia club. At least that's what it seems like. And I don't agree with what Putin is doing, but I understand his motivations. He feels threatened by the West and NATO, especially when they keep on breaking their promises about NATO expansion. Anyway, I was honored that Ranveer gave me a shout out. It totally made my day. As soon as part 2 is filmed, I'm going to put it right here. If not, you'll find another good video. Thanks for watching, and please smash that like button.